Hi everyone, this is the lecture review for Chapter 4 on consciousness. So first, we have our student learning outcomes and our definition. So what are we talking about with this unit? Consciousness is our personal and immediate awareness of our surroundings. So our mental activity, the things that surround us, external stimuli, all the things that we feel, think, all of that is related to our consciousness. Consciousness relies a lot on attention. Attention is a really funny character, though. It's very fickle. So it has a limited capacity. We can't pay attention to everything at once. We can be kind of attention blind, attention deaf. So we miss things. We don't hear everything. We don't see everything. There's been even research that's covered in your book about this clown here and how we think we would obviously see this clown if they were just parading around campus, but many of us actually miss the clown due to being on our cell phones. So paying attention is huge for our consciousness. We have to pay attention for it to actually come into the consciousness. Multitasking is something that we all think we can do. I know I think I can do this much better than I actually can. So it's doing two or more things at once. We're dividing that attention. And cell phones are actually really, really dangerous for this reason. So it's worse to drive on one's cell phone than it is often, to drive when legally over the limit. So definitely not telling you to drive over the limit, but also don't drive with your cell phone. So to think about consciousness, we have a couple topics we need to cover. So the first one we're going to kind of get into is our body's homeostasis. So with this is more, we're going to talk about our circadian rhythms. So we have many different processes, over 100, that kind of dip and flow during the day. We have a bunch of examples of the human circadian rhythm listed here. So peak mental alertness, 9 a.m., 9 p.m., 2 daily peaks. You can kind of go through and read each of these. Sensitivity to pain. So if you want to get a tattoo, probably don't schedule it for 4 in the morning. Do maybe 4 in the afternoon. Lowest sensitivity to pain. So, you can use these to your advantage. The SCN, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Okay, I tried, but I just go with SCN. This is really a mechanism for our body clock, and we rely a lot on bright light. So this helps to regulate the sleep-wake cycle. So if you have a standard sleep-wake cycle, many people will suggest leaving the curtains open so that when the light comes in, when the sun rises, you kind of get that immediate exposure. So the light will be detected by these photoreceptors signaling your SCN, and we're going to have the lower levels than of melatonin. So when we have lower levels of melatonin, then we're more awake. When our levels are higher of melatonin, then it's more time for rest. So sometimes people will even take melatonin to try and prepare their body for sleep. People who are blind are really, really interesting kind of case studies of circadian rhythms. So individuals with total blindness have really desynchronized circadian rhythms. They can't respond to the light. And so when they're unable to detect that sunlight, and so then they can go into what we call a free run. So they don't have typical day and night schedules. Our modern sleep research has benefited a lot from the development of the EEG. So we've learned more about sleep as being a physiological process with stages. We also kind of consider there to be two basic types of sleep. So with REM, this is when we're having more of the dreaming occur. So it's restful sleep, our body is moving sometimes or twitching, our eyes are going back and forth, it's rapid eye movement. And then with non-REM types of sleep, then it's more of a quiet sleep. So we don't see that eye movement that's characteristic of REM. So with our brain patterns, you can kind of read this information about the waves. So when we're alert and wakeful, then we see beta brain waves. When we start to kind of fall asleep, we start seeing more of the alpha brain waves. We can have the sensation of falling within, and then accompanied by a jerk. So you ever see little kids fall asleep? Sometimes they'll do that. They'll like, yeah, I just jerked so hard I moved my slide. But we'll see that with little kids. Um, for many of us, when we're kind of trying to go to sleep, we might see things like kaleidoscope images, we might have our day replay, things like that. The first 90 or so minutes of sleep, you can read this kind of pattern. So we'll start in with awake and alert, move in through awake but drowsy, go into stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, and ultimately into REM sleep. And we'll have cycles of this, about 5 or so per night. So this will show those 5 90-minute cycles of sleep. If you sleep next to somebody pretty consistently, then we end up being kind of a synchronized sleeper. So we often hear that word with synchronized swimmers, but we actually see that for people who consistently sleep in the same bed as well. Patterns also change over the lifespan. So for the fetus, we see these patterns developing before birth. We see the sleep cycles. With newborns, they sleep a lot, but not all at once, so it's very chopped up. And most of their time then, or about half their time, spent in REM. Infants, we end up seeing more short cycles, so 60-minute sleep cycles. Toddlers, they're getting a little bit longer. And by age 5, we often see more of this kind of characteristic of adult sleep patterns. One big issue we know developmentally is a problem is with adolescents. So a lot of our adolescents are actually very sleep deprived. So our circadian rhythms in general shift. So we know adolescents are more likely to fall asleep late, so they might not sleep until 1 a.m. and then they want to wake up more like 11 or noon. This would be great, but school doesn't work that way. So consequences of this circadian shift can include things like being more clumsy, having trouble in school, feeling depressed. Sleep over the lifespan, we can also see these patterns or different patterns of sleep across the lifespan. So as we age, we often have more of this struggle with wakefulness after our sleep onset. So we start seeing that as kind of an issue a little bit, less time spent in sleep overall. So why do we sleep? We talked about some of the patterns, some of the things that we see. Sleep, we know, is really important for clearing away some of the metabolic waste products. Immune function is huge in sleep. If you don't sleep well, you're much more likely to catch colds or to get sick. And it really helps us to remember things. So if you don't sleep, you can't remember. That's why I always hate when people cram right before a final exam. Not going to remember any of that information. Go to bed. And if you're like me, if you don't sleep well, then you can't really regulate your own mood. So if I haven't slept, then I'll cry at the drop of a hat. If you just look at me wrong, like, then I'll, tears, tears, can't do it. So you have to be careful with that one too. So the effects of sleep deprivation, after one night, we end up in micro sleep. So you might fall asleep just for a second. It has a lot of disruptions of skills. We start seeing REM rebound. And so if you're not getting enough REM sleep, then your REM sleep is going to start much sooner in that cycle, like pretty much as soon as you fall asleep, going to move into REM. If you drastically reduce your sleep, you're going to see a lot of metabolic concerns, obesity, motor skills, your hormones get disruptive. It's just not good. Don't do that. And the sleep deprived brain is we're seeing much more activation of the amygdala, and it is prone to emotion. Dreams, there's a ton we really don't know about sleeping and dreaming, which I think is pretty fascinating. But dreams, we kind of say they're, for definition, these sequences that unfold, perceptions, thoughts, emotions. We feel like they're real while we're sleeping. Many times we'll see kind of a sleep thinking. So this is kind of just thought like rumination, rather than this kind of, sequence of, more interesting perceptions and thoughts. So for when we ask people about what they dream, we often get more of everyday things. It's seldom really about sex, seldom about winning the lottery. Negative feelings are more common. Women and men dream about different things. So you can kind of read that here, or generally different things. We've all probably experienced nightmares, so this is a very negative kind of thing to have happen. And these nightmares are during REM sleep. They feel very vivid. They're frightening, typically more common in childhood, but a lot of adults get them as well. And they're different from night terrors. So with night terrors, this is often reported more by young children, and it's happens during different phases of sleep. It's much, it's terrifying. They might not remember it, but they wake up screaming and flailing. Maybe, it's very, very scary to watch if you've ever seen someone have a night terror. Freud, he believed that dreams would really tell us, called them kind of this royal road to the unconscious. They would tell us everything we needed to know about our wishes. So he said they were a safety valve. He also said that we had manifest content, which was on the top. So that might be you have a dream about carrots, and there's so many carrots, and they're all coming through, and you're scared of the carrots, and you're running from the carrots. And then he would say there's information underneath that, which was the latent content. So with that, then he would say that was a phallic symbol, so it was the penis, and then you're afraid of intercourse, is what he would say those carrots symbolized. And this really, we don't see a lot of evidence for this in neuroscientific studies. There are a lot of sleep disorders. So with the sleep disorder, these are the kind of characteristics there. You need to see it consistently, causes distress, interferes with functioning, and we'll talk about a couple different categories. So our dysomnias, with this, we're seeing disruptions in amount, quality, or timing of sleep. So you can kind of read a little bit there about insomnia, obstructive sleep apnea, which is where the airway is blocked, and then narcolepsy, where people will often fall asleep when they're not intending to, sometimes even doing things like driving. Our parasomnias are when you see different kinds of arousal or actions during sleep. So the brain is partially awake, you see the people moving, might have a genetic predisposition, can run in families. With this is where you see more of the things like sleep terrors or night terrors, sleep sex. So you can see people engaging in sexual behavior, abnormal sexual behavior when they're sleeping, and then doing things like sleepwalking, sleep eating. Some people will go and eat a whole bag of chips and wake up and be like, "Where's my chips? Where's my Doritos?" They ate them while they were sleeping. So you can see a lot of these things happen. Another really interesting disorder that you can see in sleep is REM, sleep behavior disorder, called RBD. So with this, the brain is not really shutting off, and so the person is verbally responding to their dream story and also physically responding. And many times this is a response that comes with fear, so they're afraid in their dream. So this comic kind of depicts what you can see. It often happens with older men. So they'll be asleep, but then be like yelling, hitting, kicking, violently attacking the person next to them um, while they're sleeping. They don't mean to do this. And so it can be very scary for both partners if you imagine just sleeping peacefully next to somebody and then boom, they're attacking you. Not a good feeling. So very scary for both partners. And so next we'll talk a little bit about hypnosis. I really like this definition of hypnosis because it's kind of showing it's a cooperative dance between the hypnotist who makes suggestions and the person being hypnotized who kind of takes those suggestions. So when someone's being hypnotized, they can experience a lot of sensory changes. You can have kind of a loss of sensation in the body. You might be able to carry out specific suggestions. There can be times where people are not able to recall information, but many times people actually do recall very clearly what happens in hypnosis. There is some ideas that effects of hypnosis can help us to remember events that happened farther in the past, like in our childhood. There's a form of hypnosis therapy called age regression, supposed to help you allow to re-experience these early stages of your life. But both of these can be difficult. They can both have problematic outcomes. So if you're trying to regress back to a young child, or you're trying to get in that state of mind and remember things that happened when you were a young child, you can be pretty suggestible with that. So there's a lot of explanations of why hypnosis can work. So it can be, some people believe it's a unique state of consciousness. Others think that people are responding to social demands. So the hypnotist is saying, go to sleep, and you're like, all right. And then another theory that's widely used is that there's differences in suggestibility. So if you're somebody who watches a movie or a show and gets like super deep into it and like cries, the minute it's over and you're like, oh, I just felt that on a deep level, you'd be more likely to be hypnotized. To the limits and applications, there are a lot of limits that are important. So most of the time, again, when people are hypnotized, they do not forget everything that they experienced. They're in control, they're cognizant, and therefore you can't um, hypnotize people against their will. You can't make them do horrible things like commit a crime, and you can't have someone gain like superhuman talent. It can help people, though, become more confident and aid in reducing some problematic behaviors. So, kind of, help you stop smoking or something like that. That might be a good application. Meditation is, something people often can confuse with hypnosis, but it is different. So with meditation, you're more just focusing your attention. So it can be on the present moment, it can be on inner awareness, outer awareness, but really you're trying to gain control over one's own attention. We've studied this in interesting ways. So Davidson has done work with Buddhist monks and trying to understand the differences in their brain because they've practiced meditation many times for decades. And they're able to see differences, actual differences in these monks' brains. And you can see those differences form in non-trained individuals as well if they have periods where they learn about meditation and practice it. So the brain changes can occur relatively, soon after starting meditation. And meditation also doesn't have to be related to any one religious faction. So many people will participate in meditation in a secular manner. So a lot of these carefully controlled studies have shown improvements in working memory, concentration, well-being. So for some people, they feel that that's worth a try. Our last thing that we need to discuss for this unit are psychoactive drugs. So drugs, we know what these are. They're substances. They impact our arousal, mood, thinking, our perceptions. We'll go through some of these broad categories. If you're addicted to a drug, that means you have a physical or a psychological compulsion to engage in drug use. Many things that you can experience with drugs, you can tolerate it. So maybe you only needed one little bit of cocaine to get high the first time you did it, but now you need a much larger amount. So you've got a tolerance. If you stop using it, you can experience withdrawal from removing the drug from your system. And we can also see that really drug use has a huge effect on our brain's natural reward circuitry. So, our dopamine, when we take something like cocaine, our dopamine receptors light up very strongly. But over time, they start, having a much less in response to the cocaine. And so you don't feel that high, that excitement. So people might start taking then more cocaine. And then after you stop taking the drug, it can take a while before you feel natural pleasure again. So you don't get that same dopamine rush from like looking at a beautiful flower. It takes a while to get that kind of healthy response back. Our depressants, these are things like alcohol, inhalants, tranquilizers. They kind of depress CNS activity. We know what alcohol is, but it can lessen in our inhibitions. It can produce this euphoria, even though it's a depressant. Inhalants are things that you inhale. So things like paint solvents, gasoline. Please don't do any of this. It's all just terrible. But it can lead to a lot of really big problems, and people die from inhalants. Barbiturates and tranquilizers. Our barbiturates, the illegal ones, we know these is like Quaaludes. We have things like Seconal, though, that are more, medications, but they help to reduce anxiety and promote sleep. That's their main goal. But if you take too many of them, it can depress your respiration, so you can't breathe. Tranquilizers, many people use these to relieve anxiety, things like Xanax and Valium. But again, they have that addictive quality. Opioids, we've got, natural opioids are things that come from the poppy plant, so like opium. Um, Synthetics are a huge, huge problem, which is things like heroin, oxycodone, um, fentanyl. Many places are having huge opiate um, problems in their communities, many people addicted, people dying from opioids. So, I was trained in West Virginia, and West Virginia is having major issue with an opioid crisis right now. The reason people get addicted to them is they help, reduce feelings of euphoria, reduce their pain. And then when you stop taking them, you have, pretty severe withdrawal symptoms. Another category of drugs, which is my personal favorite, is caffeine, which, I'm sure many of us have that same issue with caffeine, but it increases our brain activity. This also includes things like nicotine and cocaine. So caffeine, the reason I love it is promotes wakefulness. And so I have two little kids and I need to be awake to follow them around. But it can be addictive, and you can have symptoms from taking too much of it. And if you've ever stopped trying to drink caffeine, you know that it can have symptoms when you stop. So you can experience withdrawal. Nicotine, a lot of people are surprised it's a stimulant because it feels like it calms them down, but it really is a stimulant. So it can increase alertness, reduce fatigue. Amphetamines, the most commonly known one is methamphetamine, meth. This can have a lot of feelings of euphoria, but it can lead to really extensive damage. So meth can erode your brain, especially those areas related to emotion, reward, and memory. So people who've done meth for a long time, have 10% or so loss in these structures. So it's huge. So don't do it. Cocaine is an illegal stimulant. So cocaine used to be legal. We used to have it in things like toothache drops and Coca-Cola, but we know now that it's, addictive and can be problematic. So we don't put it in our toothache drops anymore. A few more categories of drugs, we're almost done. But the psychedelic drugs, these are things like mescaline, psilocybin. LSD is one that is a synthetic, but it can have a lot of adverse reactions. So people who take LSD can, one of the biggest reactions they can have is flashbacks. So they can have reoccurrences years later of the drug's effects. They can also have a bad trip. And so, people on a bad trip have jumped out of windows, clawed their own skin. So they feel like something is attacking them, or, they're having a lot of perceptual difficulties, things that aren't real. And it's extremely challenging. So that can be one of the major issues with that. Marijuana is kind of interesting. So it's not really a traditional psychedelic drug. The active ingredient's the THC. So if you have high doses of marijuana, you can have some of that psychedelic effects. But really, we are doing a lot more research on marijuana and finding that there's a naturally occurring brain structure. THC kind of seems to mimic almost, or to be in line with that structure, and it helps regulate pain, which is also why we see marijuana or THC utilized for reducing pain in specific illnesses. Finally, we have our designer drugs. So there's things like ecstasy and MDMA. So these are synthetic. They're often used in clubs or social situations. They work by blocking serotonin reuptake and kind of creating more serotonin, or causing the neurons to release the serotonin. Can lead to a lot of problems. So one thing people kind of learn is that it can dehydrate you, but then you have people drinking too much water and actually getting themselves sick that way. Um, and then we have our dissociative anesthetics like PCP and Special K, ketamine. These can reduce sensitivity to pain. They can, I had a teacher once who said PCP will literally make you lose your mind. So I've always remembered, literally, it'll make you lose your mind. So, people can become violent, aggressive, and even suicidal on these drugs. So that is the end of our consciousness unit. Thank you so much for working through this with me, and I hope that we've all learned something through the process. Thank you.